Okay, so here I'm going to go over a tournament I held for Hearthstone last week, a little gimmick fun theme deck tournament where every deck was pre-made, and so the players were meant to, go in there, they're going to do a blind draft, and there's 8 gimmick decks, and so there were meant to be 8 players. In reality, though, there's a bit of an issue, because I did this in Syracuse, and of course, Syracuse doesn't seem to have, it's central New York, doesn't seem to have much of a community for Hearthstone, at least in this day and age, obviously 2026, which maybe nowhere really does. It could be a dying game or people are losing their interest, but this was meant to be more like a fun like tribute or love letter or swan song for the game in a way, right, where it's nothing to do with the meta. You're trying to use decks that are just kind of fun and zany and incorporate some of the most enjoyable cards and some of my favorite mechanics in the history of the game, which I'll show you in a second and go over the deck list. I'll also put a link to the first game that I'm going to upload at the same time as this of the actual tournament itself, so it would be best to 3. Because again, it was meant to be 8 people, each having one of the gimmick decks, and then obviously one gets eliminated. The first round would be 8 people, then 4, then 2, and so on, with eliminations. But that didn't happen because only 2 people showed up. Because again, Syracuse is not a hotbed for Hearthstone. I guess it's very hard. I posted online about it. I tried to spread the word. I maybe only started announcing it a week before, so maybe that wasn't the best idea. But I even had my friend posted to Reddit about it and stuff like that, and it just didn't seem to garner much interest. So we had 2 people show up in the end, at least to compete. One of them is an esports player at the school here, and one of with current Hearthstone, and one of them is just a very good player, a legend player who plays on a regular basis, and so it was still a good matchup, but that way I had them do a blind draft, or not a blind draft. I had them draft between the 8 decks, so they both ended up with 4. So first to 3 wins, and obviously if it's 2-2, then there'd be a tie break. And so I'll show you the decks in a second here. Let me think, what else can I say? The venue I should review a little bit. I did it at Elite Gaming, which is obviously a gaming center here in Syracuse. I hadn't ever been there before, so I'll kind of give my general review of it. It wasn't bad. It looks nice enough. It's set up pretty well, but they had a few technical issues like number one, the screens. They have screens for the audience to watch what's going on. It was like the 1v1 arena that I used, but the screens only show the same computer. So there's 2 computers. One of them is on both screens for the audience to see, and the other one is not on any screen. So in other words, what I'm even showing in the videos here is going to be all from one player's perspective. I don't have the other player's perspective except for when I took it with my phone manually, right? But you shouldn't have to do that, so I don't know why that's an issue. The second thing is I had to actually go and take a flash drive and take the video myself off their computer of the recording of the game, of the tournament, because for some reason they had an issue with the video file. So those things I'll kind of say that maybe not the greatest. Again, I'm not trying to bash it, I'm just giving my honest opinion, but those are a few flaws they had. Other than that, though, I enjoyed it. Again, we made the most of it, even with the 2 people, which that's certainly not the venue's fault. That's just more like I maybe didn't announce it soon enough, but I almost get the vibe that Syracuse just isn't too big for this. Again, my background is I've done a lot of tournaments like old school Yu-Gi-Oh stuff, or, I almost wouldn't mind doing that with other card games too. I've done some of these online with the Hearthstone gimmick decks, but doing it in person is a lot more difficult, obviously, to find people. And obviously it's a situation where some of that old school Yu-Gi-Oh stuff is like a tribute as well. Go back to the GOAT format, go back to old school nostalgic things, kind of simulate the Battle City stuff where I would let people, you beat your opponent and then you get to take their best card or one of the cards from their deck, even if it breaks the rules. Like you have 3 copies of a card and you can't have 4, but if you beat your opponent, you can get a 4th one if you decide to take it. Like it was a cool format that's inspired by Battle City, where I did one that was even inspired by the anime cards for Yu-Gi-Oh, like try to use the cards from the anime and follow the rules that they use in the show, which are completely different than real life. And so it's like you would realize how one-dimensional and bad some of those decks are, because in the show they don't seem so bad because the players draw whatever they need just to advance the plot when they need it. But in real life, on a practical level, if you don't draw that exact card at that exact time, those decks are mostly garbage. So those are some of the things I've done in the past. Again, like more small scale stuff, typically not at big venues like this. It could just be at my house with people I know, or their place, or, card shops, and kind of smaller scale stuff, or like I said, even online. So yeah, I almost want to do that with like Magic and Pokemon, because I don't have much experience with those. So I almost want to, instead of playing modern Magic or modern Pokemon, why not go back and host tournaments, and I could even participate myself because I wouldn't be very good. in like old school stuff. I want to see how it was at the very beginning and like really flesh that out. So this was a very fun thing that had potential. Again, I do stuff like this all the time, but you know, like chess events I do all around town where people can play me in chess, and if they beat me, they win a prize, or, you know, whatever, random little gimmick stuff like that. So this would be kind of like where it was free to enter, right? No participation fee, no spectating fee. So it was very, very favorable as far as like trying to attract people, just doing it for the sake of it, right? Like I don't get anything out of it. I was just doing it for fun. But even then it was so hard to find people, or they almost don't believe, like it's, oh, it's too good to be true. But basically the conclusion is Elite Gaming gets like a 3 out of 5 stars. It has some flaws, and Syracuse gets a 0 out of 5 stars just as a city, because at least when it comes to Hearthstone, because apparently nobody plays the game here. So now we'll go into the decks that were actually used here. Like I said, each player got 4, and they got to choose it in a draft setting. So again, like, you know, they alternate picks and get to look at the deck list, which was something I wasn't planning on doing. It was going to be a blind draft if 8 people showed up, and that would have made more sense, because now you don't really get one deck as the winner. You get each deck going against each other once, and whoever wins, and you get a point, but then that's it. Whereas otherwise, it would have been the same deck could have, you know, won all the way through. Like, you know, this deck, let's say, could have won in every round, and then it would have been like, you know, this is the one that won the whole thing. We didn't really get to see that, but at least we got to show off each one. So this is the Warrior deck. This is going to be, obviously, you have Explore and Goro and Zinazari, which is pretty fun in and of itself. Those are just like the kind of gimmick fun cards that this is all about, like Renounced Darkness, things that are transformative, that change your whole deck, that can completely, you know, be the legacy of Hearthstone in a way. Like, Hearthstone's never going to be considered the most serious or complex or best card game ever compared to like Magic and others, but even compared to Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess. But these kind of cards that completely transform your deck and change the way the whole game is played, Renounced Darkness in particular, those are kind of legacy to me, and what I'm even trying to tribute here, because it's sort of like, you know, it's not a game that I play much anymore, and over the years I've gotten, you know, sort of bored of the meta, so I always try to return and think, oh, maybe I'll check out the new cards, new expansion, but then I always just get distracted by the gimmicks, and then I never get around to it, so that's all I end up doing. But cards like this are very fun, because again, they transform your entire deck, they change the entire way the game is played. It doesn't mean that they're good necessarily, right? Typically they're not very good, or competitive, but they're just fun. They're just interesting, right? More card games almost should have stuff like that, where it's just so zany and off the wall, right? And it just completely transforms your whole deck. So you have that as like kind of early to mid game options to cop out. But the other mechanic is the Iron Juggernaut flip, which is one of my favorite mechanics from old school Hearthstone, where you try to flip with the old Brewmasters. I had the 4-cost Brewmaster originally too, but then I put the other 2 costs in here instead now. So I mean, again, these are like archetypes of old gimmick decks that I had back in the day, and then I ended up, you know, updating them with newer cards. But the point of the newer cards is not really to make the deck better. It's more just to fit into the gimmick too, right? So it's not like, oh, let me make the best possible deck featuring Iron Juggernaut. No, of course not. You could make it way better than this, but it's more about keep the theme, but just, okay, fine, there's some newer cards that fit with it. So like all these other cards that give you bombs, right? So you're trying to put not only as many mines as possible by flipping it back to your hand, but you're also trying to put as many bombs in general. You get the death rattle as well, right? That they added somewhat recently. I forget when, but a couple years back they added the death rattle to it as well, and just some other fun cards. So again, this is maybe my favorite gimmick mechanic out of all these, where just the simplicity of flipping the Iron Juggernaut back to your hand and trying to get as many mines as possible in your opponent's deck was a very fun thing, especially in early Hearthstone, because it's kind of a big deal, and there was no other mechanic that really worked like that, right? So you can get 3, 4, 5, you know, mines in there, and that can be very fun. I had one iconic interaction actually with the Archmage Vargoth, where like, this is one of the coolest moments ever in my Hearthstone history, where I'm playing this and I've pretty much given up, and it seems like I'm going to lose for sure the next turn. And I have a couple mines in their deck, and so they draw a mine at the beginning of their turn, and now they have like 8 health left or something, and it's a priest, right? And they have, or they play, or they already have Archmage Vargoth on the field. Yeah, they already have him on the field. And so the mine triggers at the beginning of the turn, and then I pretty much resign myself to the fact that I'm going to lose, but I don't like to actually concede, so that I'm going to lose the next turn or something, and there's nothing I can do, right? But at the end of their turn, what does Archmage Vargot do? He recasts whatever spell they cast that turn. And I didn't even know the interaction worked like this at the time, but it was, oh, it recast the mine. That counts as a spell. So it recast the mine, and then they blew themselves up at the end of their turn, and they couldn't kill off their own minion because I didn't have anything on the field, and they didn't have any cards to do that. So their own Archmage caused themselves to die to the mine that they cast at the beginning of the turn, obviously just from drawing it. Like, that interaction was crazy, and I had no expectation it was going to happen, and, whatever. But, yeah, you have a lot of the bomb cards. You're trying to flip the Iron Juggernauts, put as many bombs in your opponent's deck as possible. Again, probably my favorite gimmick mechanic. It's simple, but it's just so fun, and, again, committed to that. Gives you an idea of what we're looking at, so that one's very, very cool. This one is just mostly Renounced Darkness. There's a bit of a cruel twist to it, where I have no cards that are 1, 2, 3, or 4 costs, except for that one guy here. It's all Warlock Legendaries. Obviously, they're meant to be all Warlock because you're trying to put as many Warlock cards as possible to get a good Renounced pull, right? If you have neutral cards, it kind of ruins it. The 2 neutral cards are a novelty from way back early Hearthstone as well that I did, where you put in Elise and you put in Malchezaar, because you might think, why is that relevant? Because those cards are going to affect your deck regardless of Renounce, right? You'll put Renounce, but even after you do it, Elise is still going to be in there because she's neutral, and she's going to put an Ungora pack in there that'll give you cards, so it mixes it up. In addition to whatever you get from Renounce, you'll get that Ungora pack, right? That'll just give you different stuff. So it's a way to affect your deck without interfering with Renounce. And Malchezaar is the same thing. He'll give you the 5 legendaries that'll just add to your deck. Some of them could be Warlock legendaries, and those will be changed by Renounce, but typically they won't be. So, those are good ways to affect your deck, despite Renounce being there. And again, this almost punishes you or forces you to, tempting you to play Renounce, because there's nothing from 2 to 5, so it really, really is punishing you. There are some pretty good, again, somewhat newer legendaries even in here that I did add, so it's not actually that bad if you're just willing to wait it out, right, and be patient. This could be pretty strong in and of itself, just with all these legendaries. I try not to put win condition stuff in here because that's kind of the point of a gimmick if I wanted to define it. It's a deck without a clear win condition, like Rin the Dark Disciple or something like that would have ruined it. One like OTK type thing, or like the Uther Death Knight hero, right, with the 4 horsemen. Stuff like that is really not what you want. It's more just about, again, embracing a mechanic like the Iron Juggernaut. You could say that's a win condition, but it's not like a one-shot or an auto win, right? Like Mech-Cthulhu or something, because that's not really a gimmick. It's more about the mid-range, about like letting you feel the presence of whatever mechanic you're trying to do, play stuff on the board. Not a lot of removal in these, not a lot of defensive stuff, not a lot of AoE. It's more about, let's have this mechanic happen and then make the most of it and fight it out on the board. And really, it's a mid-range kind of dream. So you're not trying to do these one-shot mechanics or win conditions, right? That's not what these gimmicks are about. Not a lot of removal and not a lot of healing and stuff like that either. So again, it's just a bunch of Warlock legendaries, which again isn't necessarily that bad, but it's curved pretty high. So it's trying to force and pressure you to play Renounce. Again, what I would consider, that was what I said is my favorite gimmick mechanic out of all these. This actual interaction of the just simple flipping the Juggernaut. But my favorite card in the whole game is Renounced Darkness, because it's so transformative and so fun and decent value. I mean, again, not in hindsight, but again, it does include now newer cards that it can give you, so that always makes it keep up somewhat. But also the fact that the cost is reduced by 1 makes it actually somewhat relevant. Compared to Explorer and Goro, maybe not quite as flashy. So again, that's my favorite gimmick mechanic. This is my favorite card. This is a little harder to see, but oh yeah, let me read the descriptions too. Branching paths can take you to Ungora, Zinazari, or somewhere much more explosive. Featuring the most fun card in the history of card games, you will be tempted towards light. This one is the Hunter, which Hunter and Paladin I had the hardest time because they don't have like one super fun transformative card or mechanic like that. And I completely excluded Priest and Rogue, because even though I could have done some sort of thing where you steal a bunch of cards from your opponent, which is what those two classes are kind of about, and then like Yogg Saron, just spam a bunch of spells that you stole from your opponent and then do Yogg. That could be a gimmick, but I'm not a big fan of either of those classes, so I just completely excluded them. But even Hunter and Paladin, I was kind of hate watching through the tournament because those decks they don't really have one solid gimmick, so I just combine a bunch of random stuff. They're not the most fun out of all these, right? That doesn't represent the gimmick idea best, but that just represents the classes. Like paladins in particular, they always ruin everything. Like in classic WoW, they're the most boring class ever because they're just all about auto attacking and they don't have any abilities. But speaking of like old class design, that's kind of what these gimmicks are about. Ideally, is like what the expression could be like. Classes are defined in classic WoW or old school MMOs and RPGs. Classes are defined not by what they can do, but by what they can't do, right? So it'd be like, oh, a mage has like really good crowd control and really good high burst damage, and they can one-shot you with Palm Pyro and stuff like that, right? But the trade-off is they run out of mana really fast, and they're very squishy, and they can be killed really easily too. So that's why it seems fair. They don't have any healing, so they're defined by what they can't do, so it makes it seem fair. Like, oh, they can one-shot you with Palm Pyro, and they can do high burst damage and have a bunch of CC, but it's fair because, again, they don't have any healing, they don't have any, they're very squishy, they can run out of mana, burn out very fast. So it's the same thing here. It's like you're going to be really good in a certain area. Like you can put a bunch of bombs in there. You can excel in a certain area, but then you'll be weak in all others. So that's the whole fun of it, right? You have very noteworthy strengths and weaknesses. Can you recreate a classic meme from Yu-Gi-Oh, or would you rather arc in a different direction? So you have the Arcane Shot Malagos potential. You do have Yogg. You obviously have Karnas's Brood is the whole emphasis of it with the Thunder Rhino. And so it's a bit of a mess, but it's trying to combine those two together. But there are just maybe too many good value cards in general, even without that. Like, it's not meant to be a singular gimmick because it wouldn't be fun enough. Like, oh, it's just Karnas's Brood. Like, okay, cool, but I wanted something more. And really, the most fun card for Hunter is just the Deathstalker Rexstar, where you can craft the custom zombies. But there's no way other than that to really do it. So this one, again, you might think is a little strong. I did play test these against each other before even the tournament. So the Paladin and the Hunter didn't win. I won't even say which one won in those playtests that I did. But they didn't win. That's why I didn't change them. But some of these cards just in and of themselves, right, like Right Wing or Agrimar or Arelon and stuff like that, they're almost just a little bit too good on their own. So the consistent value and performance of the Hunter and the Paladin would be better than the other decks consistently, but they didn't win when I playtested it either. So I didn't consider that. I didn't feel the need to change it, but again, some of these are without any purpose, so maybe not the clearest gimmick. Again, you're trying to do the Karnasa Brood, which imitates Berserker Soul, if you know that moment from Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously, it's a relatively fun thing, but not the most fun class, honestly. And you have trying to buff the Karnas's Brood spawns as well. You have the Malagos Arcane Shot thing. Again, not the most fun mechanics there. Now this one is super fun. Again, basically every evolution mechanic in the history of the game. I had a very clear rule set for this one. Combine every evolve. Oh, I just said that too without even reading it. But what this means is every card either says transform, like it's transforming something as in the evolution effect, or it says make a copy, summon a copy of something, so that creates good fodder to like Azurite, Chain Gang and stuff, Doppelgangster, create a copy so that you have more things to evolve. Or it says I guess basically either of those two, right? Either it says transform, either your own minion or your opponent's minion, or it says summon a copy, right? So every single thing in there says that, except for Eye of the Storm, which again, it summons 3 things, but it doesn't say copy. That's the one exception, just to get the Carnival Clown effect. But yeah, this is a very clear gimmick that follows a very clear rule set, right? As long as it says summon a copy, which gives you, again, more material for evolution, or it says transform. Either transform your opponent's minion, like devolve, or transform your own. Right, even if it's like the cosplay, transform into a copy of your opponent's minion that they just played, or even Faceless Manipulator, so transform into a copy of something. Those don't exactly match the theme, but it still does say the transformation thing. So this one is one of my favorites because it's such a clear point, right? It's not about whether it's good or not. Again, it's so clearly committed to that mechanic that it has every basic evolution interaction in the history of the game, everything that transforms something. So it's just, again, it's about the hard commit and then see what you can make the most of it with. Now, this one is my favorite mechanic, period, in the history of the game. My favorite keyword in the history of Hearthstone, which for a long time it didn't even have a keyword. So again, and I made some of these archetypes really early on in Hearthstone too. Like, there weren't that many elusive minions in the game, but I still made these anti-spell kind of druid and mage decks. So the druid one was inspired. You might think, why, you know, you could do this with any class where you just have every elusive minion in the game, right? And obviously all the class ones. So druids over time have had really some of the better ones or some of the most elusive minions for their class. But a tribute to my favorite mechanic in card gaming, countering spells and removal. Hexproof and Magic the Gathering, and the belated keyword in Hearthstone, elusive, because it took them till like 2023 or 4 or whatever to actually add the keyword. Before that was the very long mouthful of just can't be targeted by spells or hero powers, which this mechanic isn't the most useful actually against these other decks because they don't have really removal or things that target you. And so even though I love this mechanic, it maybe doesn't represent itself the best in this tournament context, but still. And especially, you know, you might think, oh, these decks wouldn't do too well on the ladder, obviously, versus against each other. They're all evenly matched because they're all flawed and all imperfect, so they're kind of balance each other out. So it makes a level playing field, even though they all suck, you could say. They all suck together, so it's fine because, you know, it's a fair game against each other. You know, one gimmick meets another. But, like, this is the kind of thing you can play on the ladder, and if you get the Lorthamar interaction, which this one doesn't actually... Oh, no, it does have. Right, you can imagine, like, oh, you summon a 7-mana 14/14 with elusive, and then the next turn you summon a, you know, 12/18, and then you keep doing that. So even the best decks or even meta decks are going to struggle to deal with that because there's only so much they're going to be able to do to remove stuff that is obviously, you know, immune to everything. So at some point that becomes very difficult for your opponent to deal with. So that's a very fun interaction to do. This was actually like a plot choice where, you know, whoever chose this in the draft or whoever would have gotten it in a blind draw gets to choose one or the other because it's basically the same mechanic. So either you choose the mage one or the druid one. The druid one just seems to be better anyway, but so yeah, what I was saying is what this was inspired by. Why did I pick druid and mage? And this was even before, like, Galakron is where some of the most elusive minions in the game came. But even before that, it's like, oh, I would have, I guess the mage one maybe represents that better. I would have like 2 copies of Fairy Dragon, right? A lot of these didn't even exist, right? Evasive Chimera came with Galakron, 2 Fairy Dragons and 2 counter spells and 2, you know, what other ones did we even have? Like, you know, you'd have 2 of the Trogs, and you'd have 2 of the Arcane Nullifiers, and 2 of the Spectral Knights, and, you know, you'd have Lotheb, and you'd have the other Trog, and you'd have, you know, an Nerubian Unraveler times 2. So that would make up for the fact that a lot of these other ones didn't exist, right? Trogzor, Sogoth even being old school. So that would be the point. That we're talking about a time long before there were even that many elusive minions in the game, but I still committed to that mechanic, right? I was trying to make that archetype of that deck because I like that mechanic so much. You know, going back to my Jinzo spell canceller type obsession and Yu-Gi-Oh! Even, where it's more satisfying to counter your opponent and what they're doing than trying to do anything yourself. So why did I choose Druid, even outside of the eventual Galakron having, you know, some good elusive minions in there? The reason why I actually did it is because of the fact that of the Druid buff. So whether it be Embiggen or whether it be, again, even though this card is really bad, Pride's Fury, so it's these AoE buffs. So you have to think about the logic of that. Why Druids as opposed to any other class to just make a deck with a bunch of elusive minions in there? It's because, oh, what a cool mechanic. Because you can't target, unlike Hexproof, where you actually can target your own, but your opponent can't target them. It's like, oh, how can I buff or effectively heal my elusive minions and rub it in my opponent's face without having to target them? Oh, I can use AoE buffs, which Druids had at least a decent number of them, right? You see some of them in here. So the premise with the Druid one is let's AoE buff these elusive minions, so you're kind of rubbing it in your opponent's face, right? They're like, oh, they can't target it, but you can, even though you really can't single target it. You get all these buffs that are like, oh, I get to AoE buff something that you already can't target, right? So I get to really exploit that. So it's taking that basic mechanic, let me have something you can't target it, but I'm still going to buff them despite that and effectively heal them. You know, I give a +4 health is effectively the same thing as healing something that you otherwise can't target. So you're hard committing to that. So that was the gimmick with this one, is the AoE buff druid deck where you're taking these elusive minions that can't be targeted and buffing them, then the mage was really just because of counterspell. You know, I mean, there's not much of a deeper meaning to mage or too many mage cards that would support this. Just any mage cards that relate to that. And even you might think like, oh, splitting image and stuff like that, duplicate, don't really make sense, but it's to really flesh out the elusive all the more and say, okay, I'm going to, you finally get rid of an elusive minion. Or like, you know, there's a few the ways to kind of stick it to your opponent here. Like, oh, I summon all elusive minions all game, and then I finally summon something like that isn't elusive, like one of the Lotheb or Nerubian Unraveler. It's like, oh, they can finally target something with one of their spells, but oh, now they'll get punished for it by counterspell, or they'll get punished for it by the Trogzor, right? So when they finally get to use a spell that they've been waiting the whole game to do and haven't been able to because it's all been elusive minions, even that you punish them for and really stick it to them. And on top of that, you're also doing they finally get rid of an elusive minion, they have to trade in on the board and play like a mid-range, like a real, you know, what the point of some of these decks is, like it forces you to actually play on the board, which is why I like this mechanic so much. You can't rely on a removal. You finally get rid of something that's been annoying you and, you know, they've struggled to deal with, and then you duplicate it, and then you make a copy of it. So imagine how annoying that is, right? You summon a 7-mana 14/14 that's been buffed up by Lorthamar, and they finally attack into it to try to get rid of it because they have to, and oh, now you get a copy of it. Or oh, they finally kill it trading in the board because they're helpless to do anything else, and then you get more copies of it, right? So it's really sticking it to them and pressing that and making that a spectacle, right? So again, those are both very similar. A mage who hates magic. I heard you like elusive, so I combine it with even more cards that hinder magic. And then we have the Paladin one. Again, this is a buff deck that features Galvadon. Not the most fun mechanic. Like I said, Hunter and Paladin are my least favorite in here, and maybe are a little bit too strong on an average level because they don't really rely on the gimmick as much, or it's not as punishing. There's some just random cards in here that you could argue whether they should be or not. There's also the gimmick of the no neutral cards. So it's Paladin only cards that you get the invitations, a couple of benefits from this. Right, if your deck has no neutral cards, you get that. Right, so arguably some of those things I could have tweaked, but like I said, I did play test it. Again, it's a Galakron buff thing plus just no neutral cards. Boring Paladin, typical, like even in WoW, they always live up to that. Buffs, and more buffs. Figuring out this deck should be light work. And then, of course, the final two are the Whizbang. This is the old Whizbang, and then we have the new Whizbang. And so those were kind of like, I compelled them each to have to take at least one of them so that they would have to face each other. You can't have two Whizbangs out of the 4 decks. And so, yeah, you can check out the actual tournament videos that I'll upload after this. But again, I think you understand the theme and what I was trying to go for. This, of course, gives you standard decks from the last 2 years or something like that. I forget exactly. And then this gives you, obviously, one of the made-up decks that are kind of like gimmick decks in their own right. But yeah, the idea is, again, take a mechanic, really commit to it. It's more about the gimmick than it is about quality. Not a lot of removal, more about fighting out of the board, more about really fleshing out mechanics and having to really feel the presence of something all the way instead of, again, just a silence or removal, AoE, right? And again, they're allowed to incorporate newer cards over the years, but only as it fits into the gimmick mechanic. So, for example, you'll see the Prescient Slither Drake, right, which you can actually get the interaction here too because there are some dragons, but this is a new card, but it's only there because it's elusive, right, not because of anything else. And so it's not like you're trying to make the best deck that features the mechanic. You're trying to make a deck that commits to the mechanic as much as possible. So this, again, like every elusive minion in the game, again, these all force you to kind of fight it out on the board and make the most of it. You're not trying to really make the best deck possible. So the gimmicks balance each other out. It's a fair match. It's fun. This is what I like to do, like I said, with other card games. So it's a whole kind of format that I do with a lot of things, but unfortunately there isn't much of a following for this game around this area. So it was still fun to do, and you can watch the tournament coming up soon on here. And I'll put the link to the first game at least in here. So yeah, I just wanted to go over that so you could understand the deck list and everything, because it would have been too complicated for me to explain it in that video. I didn't want to make like a super long intro, so I just did this. But yeah, again, the last point, not a lot of healing, not a lot of removal, not a lot of AoE, not a lot of silence and stuff like that. It's all about just take the minions, take the mechanics on the board, face them like a man. You know, you really get to flesh them out, commit to the gimmick super hard, and again, pay tribute to some of the most fun cards in the history of the game, because that to me is kind of what the legacy of Hearthstone can be. Not that it has to be, oh, the best card game ever or anything like that, but it's just, it's had some of the most fun cards and mechanics ever. Right, and so that at least it can hang his hat on. And one funny thing that happened, speaking of the venue too, the Elite Gaming, I had to do like a security check on my thing, like my email and stuff as I'm logging into Battle.net on there. So it's like, imagine if I'm going to compete in a tournament at a venue like that, and then, oh, I have to do that, and whoops, I forgot my authenticator key or my whatever email or something. Imagine if that's a reason why somebody misses a tournament or whatever. It's just kind of like a little annoying that you should have to do that. Like maybe esports venues should have a immunity from that, because you know you're going to be logging in with all kind of different accounts there all the time. But I did have to actually do that.